In the realm of American mythology, few narratives loom as large or as romanticized as that of the Wild West. As the 19th century came to a close, the West had been settled, and an era wrought with violence, exploitation, and genocide now found itself swept up in this collective nostalgia of historical revisionism. The Western, as a genre, emerged in media to reinforce this romanticized view of the past, and the tropes brought along with it have successfully reshaped the cultural perception of the American West for generations. A neo-Western, or revisionist Western, is a response to the classic Western genre, offering a fresh perspective on the traditional tropes and themes associated with the Wild West. While classic Westerns often portray a clear dichotomy between heroes and villains with simplistic narratives of good versus evil, neo-Westerns subvert these conventions by incorporating morally ambiguous characters and exploring complex social, political, and cultural issues. One of the key differentiators of neo-Westerns is their willingness to challenge the romanticized myth of the American frontier, portraying a more honest and historically accurate depiction of the era. Instead of glorifying the conquest of the West and the expansion of civilization, these films delve into the darker aspects of Western expansion, including the displacement of indigenous peoples, the exploitation of natural resources, and the inherent brutality of frontier life. Furthermore, neo-Westerns often explore themes like identity, alienation, hypermasculinity, and disillusionment in the face of modernity. One of the most poignant and integral aspects of neo-Westerns is their ability to reflect the ongoing relevance of the Western genre in contemporary culture. By reimagining and reinterpreting the tropes and themes of the traditional Western, these films invite viewers to reconsider the mythology of the American frontier and confront the complexities of the nation's history. In doing so, they not only shed light on the past but also offer insights into the present, prompting audiences to reflect on issues of justice, power, and identity in their own time. In the 21st century, within the wake of events like 9/11 and the financial crisis, or growing conversations surrounding racism, masculinity, and American imperialism, the neo-Western has become more mainstream than ever. The year 2007 marked a significant moment for this subgenre, as three seminal films, The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, There Will Be Blood, and No Country for Old Men, were released within months of each other. And in my humble opinion, all three of these films place amongst the greatest Westerns to ever grace the silver screen. So, I thought, why not revisit each of these films to analyze and appreciate the phenomenal filmmaking craft on display in what may have been the peak of the genre, at least for now. This is 2007, Year of the Neo-Western. The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford is a long title, and a total spoiler, but of course that's not the point. This blunt, unambiguous title serves a story that seeks to peel back the mythic iconography of traditional Hollywood westerns and present a gritty, toned-down deconstruction of the famed Jesse James and the man who shot him. Based on Ron Hansen's 1983 novel of the same name, The Assassination of Jesse James was Australian writer-director Andrew Dominik's first Hollywood production, and boy did he start with a bang. A bleak, somber, and introspective bang, that is. More like a soft fizzle, but the subdued execution is very intentional. As I said, this film seeks to deconstruct the legacy of Jesse James, taking America's most romanticized outlaw and showing him for what he is. An outlaw. A thug, a murderer, a career criminal, but most importantly, a man. And even though he's a legendary historical figure being played by one of the most famous men on the planet, Jesse James is not the main character of this film. Robert Ford is. Casey Affleck's portrayal of Bob Ford is so raw and immersive. He's sensitive, fragile, timid, obviously cowardly, you've heard the title, but generally you don't want your main character to be so meek and passive. It can make an inherently unlikable protagonist, especially opposite to a performance like Brad Pitt's effortlessly magnetic Jesse James. But Bob's youthful naivety is almost endearing, and his wide-eyed, childlike obsession with Jesse sets the stage for the themes explored in this story. To effectively deconstruct the myth of Jesse James, we must first see it through the eyes of someone who believed in it. We open to a montage of Jesse's daily life in quieter moments. It's all very melancholy and dreamlike, with this vignetted tilt-shift distortion, fully done in camera by the way, Nick Cave and Warren Ellis's whimsical and nostalgic score that sounds like an antique music box, and Hugh Ross's narration dropping bits of Jesse James trivia. It's almost as if we're hearing this romanticized history book, but shown Jesse in his most intimate moments. We see his humanity in slice-of-life interactions with his children, but alongside his lonely, vacant stare and racing thoughts, fear, longing, regret, paranoia. The Jesse James this opening displays is a far cry from the slick, charismatic outlaw he's often remembered as. This is something that another neo or revisionist western like Unforgiven does so well. This pop culture mythology of the Western gunslinger is nonsensical. A man who's lived a life of violence and petty brutality, a man who's destroyed countless lives, no matter how famous or infamous, will carry the weight of those actions to the grave. Realistically, you'd be an emotionally volatile, remorseful, and paranoid wreck, always considering the inevitable ramifications of your actions, in this mortal life or in the divine. The James gang stole over $200,000, roughly $6 million today, Jesse James himself killing potentially over 20 people. People who likely all had families and loved ones, yet he was glorified in the press as a folk hero, an American Robin Hood, especially resonant with the post-war South, as James himself was a Confederate sympathizer and bushwhacker. His gang's exploits were glamorized in countless newspapers, books, stage plays, dime novels, films, and Jesse James established himself as a household name and an American icon. Like any celebrity, James had his superfans. This is where Robert Ford comes into play. Bob's only 19 when he first joins the James gang, and he functions as an especially effective audience surrogate because, as a child, Bob idolized Jesse, collecting newspapers, dime novels, and all sorts of Jesse James memorabilia. Being the youngest of 5 brothers, Bob was often made fun of for his fascination with Jesse James stories which likely gave the young Robert a sense of comfort and potential. He kept a list of similarities between him and Jesse as long as his nightshirt, hoping he too could ascend to the status of Jesse himself one day. So when Bob introduces himself, it's not just him who's meeting his hero, but the audience as well. Robert Ford represents us, the audience, America, the world, our fascination with this mythic figure, and the extent to which obsessing over celebrities can have dire consequences. As they say, never meet your heroes. Robert Ford, or Bob, is a character you can't help but empathize with. He's got a chip on his shoulder, something to prove. Even though Bob comes off as awkward, antisocial, and honestly a little creepy, you can't help but feel bad for the guy. His family and friends bully him relentlessly, no one takes him seriously. Bob wants to be admired and accepted. He's been powerless his whole life, and someone like Jesse James represents everything Robert Ford wishes that he could be. When he approaches Jesse for the first time, all fidgety and nervous, their interaction feels like a teenager asking out a school crush. You know, going over all the potential outcomes in your head, aiming to come off as relaxed and confident, hoping to strike up a good convo and hit it off. Not saying Bob's in love with Jesse or anything, although some have interpreted this film that way. I think it's more so that Bob is in love with the idea of Jesse James. He wants to be him, and if he can't be Jesse James, he'll do whatever it takes to be close to him, to be like him, to be the next Jesse James.
Can't figure it out. Do you want to be like me? Or you want to be me?
He's obsessed to the point where it genuinely stunts him socially. Bob is so desperate to make a good impression that Jesse's genuine attempts at casual conversation go completely over his head, and it's clear Jesse picks up on this. Something's up with this kid.
Oh, you know what I got right next to my bed? It's The Train Robbers, or A Story of the James Boys by R.W. Stevens. Many's the night I stayed up, my eyes open and my mouth open, just reading about your escapades in the Wide Awake Library.
But Jesse is well aware of his own celebrity status, which is perhaps why he gives Bob the benefit of the doubt and lets him join the gang. But there's always the possibility that Bob could have been some kind of informant or assassin after reward money. You might think, well, that is the case. Bob does end up betraying him, but that's not the point. The title may lead you to believe that this film is about an assassination plot or something, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The how isn't important, it's the why. Over time, Robert Ford grows disillusioned with the man he idolized, yet at the same time never truly gets over his obsession with Jesse. The same way pop culture, well aware of the brutal reality of the Wild West, the violence, genocide, exploitation, we can't help but to continue to romanticize this era, because we want to believe in the myth. It's fun to believe in the myth. Cowboys are cool, fanning a 6-shooter revolver's cool, the western landscape is stunning, Indian raids, bushwhacking guerrilla fighters, masked bandits robbing banks and stagecoaches, it's all so badass. There's a reason the Wild West train robbery has been a staple of American cinema since its very inception. It's thrilling and inherently cinematic. The film uses that inherent cool factor to illustrate the mystical storybook aura that surrounds Jesse James. During the train robbery scene, the once grounded and intimate portrayal of Jesse as seen in the opening sequence switches to something far more slick, glamorized, and mythical. He's shrouded in smoke as his lone silhouette fearlessly halts a speeding train, like an otherworldly force of nature. We as an audience see Jesse as Bob does, but once we step into the train cars, that mystical aura that surrounds Jesse vanishes. His actions just come off as sinister. Jesse's overall attitude isn't charming anymore, it's just petty and cruel.
You down on your knees.
Why?
You ought to pray. I'm gonna kill you.
Brad Pitt is scary as hell in this role, but just as vulnerable when he needs to be. Jesse is such a bitter, paranoid shell of a man, and he recognizes this. He recognizes that he's losing himself. Within a few moments, Jesse will go from this cruel monster to honest, raw, and human. Brad Pitt's on his A-game here. I don't know why this performance doesn't get more attention. It's so real. You don't hate Jesse. He's by no means a villain. In the beginning, we're just as captivated by this guy as Bob. We respect his fame, we fear what he's capable of, and that magnetic Jesse James charisma entices us. However, it becomes clear to Bob and to the viewer that there's something far darker here. You can call it PTSD, or just general paranoia, but Jesse's life of crime is catching up with him. Mentally, that is. He doesn't trust anyone. He's plagued by fear and regret.
I go on journeys out of my body and look at my red hands and my mean face. I wonder about that man that's gone so wrong.
He aims to keep his emotions under the surface and save face, so when they do come to light, it's in bitter and pathetic outbursts. Needless to say, Bob's youthful glee and naivety about being so close to Jesse has started to shift. His obsession twists and darkens in every eerie gaze, dissatisfied and disillusioned. Bob had these expectations of open arms and companionship, but all he's left with is an unstable, paranoid wreck who could care less about him. Since their first meeting, nothing's gone the way he anticipated.
Well, he's sort of easy to be around. I can't say the same for you, Bob.
I'm sorry to hear you say that.
Jesse's less than enthused attitude towards Bob rejects the parasocial relationship Bob had built up since his childhood. When Jesse ends up mocking and bullying him the same way everyone else in his life has, it completely shatters him. There's a resentment there now only so strong because of Bob's love for Jesse James. I know this is a weird comparison to keep making, but remember how I likened Bob to a teenager with a crush? Now think of that crush rejecting him. Bob goes full incel, feeling like he's owed something greater and that life is unfair, that what he's been dealt is unfair.
Hey, son.
While Bob's obsession is pathetic and creepy, and the film could easily portray his final choice as jealous and spiteful, when Robert Ford does pull that trigger, killing Jesse James, we don't hate him, just as we don't hate Jesse. We understand both of these men, and for the past 2 hours we've witnessed a masterful portrait of events that led them to this moment. And I refer to both because Jesse's death was as much his choice as Bob's. In his final moments, reflecting on his self-destructive path of paranoia and isolation, and accepting the consequences of his life of bloodshed, knowing he's given Robert Ford full reason to believe he'll kill him like he's killed everybody else, he willingly gives himself up. He accepts his fate, offering Bob the opportunity to kill him with these immortal words.
Don't that picture look dusty?
Robert Ford has killed Jesse James. But Jesse James does not die. He's martyred and immortalized as a legend, the American Robin Hood, and Robert Ford is the coward who shot him. The title, The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford, bluntly states how history remembers it. Be careful what you wish for. Bob was never famous, only infamous, and while the film could easily be a cautionary tale about vain obsession, which it is to some extent, it also portrays Robert Ford in a sympathetic light. And his decision to kill Jesse is one of desperation and fear, one that haunts him to his final moments. Robert Ford wanted to be Jesse James, which is impossible. He could only be the coward who shot him, and accept that new identity would follow him beyond the grave. No child would be named after Robert Ford, nobody would read stories about him, nobody would visit the house Bob grew up in or auction off his personal belongings. When people did come to see Bob's live recreation of the assassination, it wasn't out of love for him, but morbid curiosity, and commemorating the legacy of Jesse.
Murder! Cur! Coward!
You want to investigate my courage? Do you? Find out! Find out!
Having experienced the real Jesse James, the violent, unstable criminal, Bob lost sight of how the world saw Jesse, just as he once saw Jesse, and how the world would see him.
You know what I expected? Applause.
It doesn't matter that Jesse was a career criminal and a murderer. It was never about the man or his actions, it was about the myth. Jesse James was a hero, whom the coward Robert Ford shot in the back, collected the reward money, then paraded around the country doing live shows, capitalizing on the spectacle of his death. In doing these shows, whatever attempt at justifying or glorifying his actions failed. All the myths and stories surrounding Jesse were created by other people, by the media, by the world. When Bob tries to create his own story, the world rejects him and assigns their own. He's a 19th century Judas. As the film comes to a close, Robert has had years to truly bear the weight of his actions. The mockery and resentment he'd faced his whole life, that he'd so desperately tried to escape by crossing paths with Jesse, is now only amplified by the two meeting. Instead of just the Ford family thinking he's useless, the world now wishes he was never born. A montage mirroring the film's opening portrays Bob's final days, as narration plainly but poignantly describes Robert Ford's murder by a disgruntled avenger, and his legacy, or lack thereof, in death. I cry every time. It's some bleak shit, and basically spells out everything I've been rambling about way more poetically and effectively than I could. The stars truly did align on this film. I still have so much I can gush about. First and foremost, the direction here. Andrew Dominik clearly knows how to work with actors. These performances are so naturalistic and vulnerable. The tension in conversation is so palpable, and the pace of dialogue is patient. The writing isn't showy, it's grounded in reality, but still effortlessly applies a poetry between the lines. It's such a refreshing way to approach a Western story. The cast is great, but I should talk about other actors beyond Pitt and Affleck, because they casted incredible unknowns and character actors for our leads to play off of. Guys like Joel McNichol or Garrett Dillahunt knock it out of the park with the little screen time that they have.
Well, I'm in the same situation, you see. I was terrified I saw you ride up.
I just happened by, Ed.
I suppose you heard gossip, though. Suppose you heard Jim Cummins come by here. You might have thought that we were planning to capture you or get that reward, and that ain't true. But you might have suspected it.
See? I cannot even begin to describe how phenomenal the acting in this movie is. And that's something you'll hear me repeat throughout this entire video in regards to other films. I don't know what the fuck was in the air in 2007, but all these movies deliver some of the most effortlessly immersive and natural performances I've seen. Our two leads are on their A-game here, both of which I think are the best performances these actors have ever delivered. I know Brad Pitt says this is his favorite role he's ever done, and even when Manchester by the Sea exists, I can't help but look at Casey Affleck's Robert Ford as his career-defining work. I don't think acting can get better than this. Of course, there's a few more familiar faces besides Affleck and Pitt. Sam Rockwell plays Bob's brother and fellow James Gang member Charlie Ford, and as always, he's amazing. I love Sam Rockwell. Jeremy Renner and the late Sam Shepard both nail their parts as Woodhite and Frank James, respectively. I also always forget Zooey Deschanel pops up at the end. Paul Schneider, who I know from Parks and Rec, plays a guy named Dick Little, who's this really poetic and seductive Riz god with fucking Austin Powers mojo. Like, his whole thing is that everybody wants to fuck him, to the point where it gets him in a shootout with another one of the gang members, Woodhite. There's this awesome shootout sequence that's super grounded and realistic. It's all clumsy and awkward. The portrayal of violence is something that this film as a whole excels at. I love the way guns sound here. Quick, violent pops, almost smacks. Like in spaghetti westerns, they use the sounds of cannons for gunshots. That's why I'm so used to that cartoony blast sound effect that you're probably familiar with. So this is a nice change of pace. See, it just feels far more gritty and violent. All of the sound design here is stellar. Sonically and visually, this film is a technical marvel. From Nick Cave and Warren Ellis's heart-wrenching musical score to Roger Deakins' masterful cinematography, which in this case, like so many other people in this movie, I think is his career best work. As much as I love the other two movies I'll cover, there's something about the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, the experience of it all, the journey it takes you on, it's special. Unfortunately, Andrew Dominik's films since this haven't really done it for me. He's in the same vein as other directors it looked like would be household names and industry mainstays, guys like Nicholas Winding Refn or Neil Blomkamp. Dominik's next film, Killing Them Softly, lacked this film's precision and emotional hook, and I don't even want to entertain talking about Blonde. I hope Dominik finds his footing soon, but this film is leagues above plenty of known directors' best work, so I'm sure he doesn't have much to complain about. There Will Be Blood. That title, man, that is raw as hell. It sets the tone perfectly for this monster of a movie. I love Boogie Nights, it's still my favorite of his, but this has gotta be Paul Thomas Anderson's magnum opus in my eyes. It's a century-defining film. Daniel Day-Lewis as the cutthroat, turn-of-the-century oil man Daniel Plainview is regarded today as one of the most masterful acting performances of all time, alongside Marlon Brando in The Godfather, or Robert De Niro in Shark Tale.
You know what?
The film's opening sequence lets us know just who this guy is, all without a single spoken word. A blaring swell of eerie strings takes us into the desert, where a lone prospector chips away at stone. Completely isolated and clearly having been at this for days, we're shown without words that Daniel Plainview is a working man, a man of true grit, one to be respected. When the ladder of the mineshaft breaks and he falls and breaks his leg, it's sheer will and determination that liberates him from that hole, pushes him across the desert and gets him back to civilization, with the silver he mined, of course, the profits of which he uses to establish his own oil business in California. But when one of his workers dies in a freak accident, leaving behind an infant son, Daniel seeks the opportunity to adopt the child as his own and rebrand his oil company into a father-son family business. His initial look at the infant, HW, could first be interpreted as one of sympathy, but it becomes clear taking in a son would present a newfound legitimacy to his business, another example of Daniel's immoral but effective cunning, and his exploitative nature. And the film's first spoken words reintroduce us to the character through Day-Lewis's iconic opening monologue.
We're wasting time. Please.
I do my own drilling. And the men that work for me, and they are men I know. I make it my business to be there and to see their work. I'm a family man. I run a family business. This is my son and my partner, H.W. Plainview. We offer you the bond of family that very few oil men can understand.
Daniel dominates every interaction. Even when he doesn't necessarily hold the power in a dynamic, he gives himself the power. For example, when he's requesting something, when he's requesting to drill oil in a town, he flips the townsfolk on their head, and they're pleading for him to reconsider and stay after he decides he doesn't want to anymore, which is especially impressive considering just moments before they were rejecting his very proposal. Daniel outwits pretty much anyone he interacts with, and he resents humanity for this fact. Everyone is a fool to him, a sheep, naive and incompetent. Daniel only grants respect to those who he sees as on his level or beneficial to him in some way, and even then that just further exemplifies his exploitation of others. A core example of what Daniel sees as humans' grave naivety is religion. He's so self-reliant and practical in his philosophy that the only faith that Daniel has is in himself, and the idea that someone would seek to depend on a mystical god to him is nonsensical and pathetic. Throughout cordial conversation, Daniel brushes off his faith as vaguely agnostic in nature, likely as to not stir the pot in business, but when heated and emotional, he reveals his disdain for what he sees as the false promises of Christianity and false prophets as a whole. As I said, Daniel's only faith is in himself and his business. Enter the Sunday family. Daniel is first introduced to one of the sons, Paul, when he visits Daniel's office seeking money in exchange for the location of a potentially lucrative oil deposit. Daniel at first seeks to outwit Paul into revealing said location without paying him, but Paul quickly shows that he's no fool.
Where are you from?
I wouldn't be telling you. That's what I want to sell you.
Daniel respects Paul's intelligence and is intrigued by his confidence. For once, he isn't in control. Paul has something to offer and it's clearly valuable. Daniel decides he's interested and pays Paul $500 up front, and promises more once the oil is discovered. In turn, Paul reveals the location of his family's ranch in Little Boston, California, where Daniel is set to meet up with the Sundays and begin scoping out the area. However, Daniel ends the cordial transaction reaffirming his dominance via intimidation.
If I travel all the way up there and I find that you've been lying to me, I'm gonna find you and I'm gonna take more than my money back. Is that all right with you?
This is the last time we see Paul Sunday in the film. Jumping forward to the Plainview's arrival in Little Boston, Daniel and HW confirm that oil is present in the area, buying up the surrounding land and meeting up with the rest of the Sunday family, Paul's little sisters, Paul's father, and his twin brother, Eli. This exchange is another fantastic display of Daniel's method, strategically deceiving the Sundays in the true worth of their land.
How much are we gonna pay them?
I'm not going to give them oil prices. I'll give them quail prices.
What about our oil?
What about it?
We have oil here. That's worth something.
Oh, do you have someone who can drill for it?
With the deal complete, Daniel's well can begin production. However, Eli also happens to be the town's local pastor, and he requests to publicly bless the oil well before any extraction begins. Daniel, annoyed by what he sees as Eli's audacity to have to grant him permission for his business, slights the young preacher by having Eli's sister, a child, bless the well in his place. In doing this, he rejects Eli's desire to influence the drilling, along with preventing him the opportunity to publicly illustrate any influence over this new business venture sweeping the town. In rural communities like this, a preacher has the same influence as a mayor or sheriff, so Daniel, as usual, needs to let Eli know who's now in charge. Daniel and Eli are the two main players throughout the film, and with their dynamic established, we can now explore their characters and how they relate to the themes of the story. With analyses of There Will Be Blood, you'll often hear the phrase, "Religion is Eli's business, and business is Daniel's religion." And while that is an oversimplification, it is a fairly apt one in the root of conflict between these characters. Eli Sunday fulfills a common trope you see in media of the unhinged rural American preacher of the past, one who, while likely truly God-fearing, also embraces the power and influence that comes from being your isolated community's lone prophet. Go far back enough in history, and priests were basically rock stars. Eli has his own means of accumulating power and wealth, through his theatricality and charisma, through desperate people's faith. Daniel sees right through Eli's facade of good-natured faith and finds him dishonest. Not to others. To Daniel, that's a given. He lies all the time. But at least he's honest with himself and knows exactly the kind of man he is. He's capitalism personified, not the idyllic American dream, but the brutal reality of the era. Whereas Eli masquerades his nature. Eli Sunday clearly resents the townsfolk's attention and influence shifting to Daniel once he's promised Little Boston immeasurable wealth. All Eli ever had was the metaphysical and divine, but money makes the world go round, not faith, and Daniel has cold hard cash to back up his claims. Back to the plot, let's talk about one of the greatest cinematic set pieces of the 21st century. Daniel's well finally strikes its black gold in a fury, blasting the onlooking HW into unconsciousness. Johnny Greenwood's score rattles ferociously as oil engulfs the frame. Daniel grabs HW in a fatherly cradle, fleeing the scene, a rare glimpse of his genuine affection for his quote-unquote son, that or his desire to not lose his greatest business asset. However, HW, while alive, is permanently deafened by the blast. By now, the entire well has erupted in flames, and Daniel must attend to his other business asset. Following Daniel blaze back to the scene surrounded by the also running extras is so mesmerizing. We see he and his workers frantically hammer what are these called? You know, the support peg things on tents and shit? I don't know, you know what I'm talking about. It looks badass though. It's fire, no pun intended. The pale, dusk sky darkens as it's engulfed by black smoke emanating from a striking pillar of fire. At this point, Daniel has completely blotted out HW from his mind, as he becomes entranced by this confirmation of fortune below Little Boston. The camera cuts to Eli, I guess seeing it from his house, terrified by the sight. The well collapses as Daniel laughs with glee. In the following days, Eli approaches Daniel regarding the money that he had promised the Sundays for the land. Daniel, in the wake of the fire and HW's accident, is not in the mood. He slaps around Eli, he beats the shit out of him, smothering him in the oily mud, taunting the poor kid the entire time. Eli goes home for dinner with his family, humiliated. He lashes out at his father for his foolishness in selling the land to Daniel, invoking God in a way that seems twisted and petty.
Do you think God is going to save you for being stupid? He doesn't save stupid people, Abel.
Daniel already had little to no empathy at the start of the story, but I think having a son to care for kept him tethered to humanity. But now that his son is no longer as useful to him being disabled, Daniel views HW as a burden. HW recognizes his father's growing apathy for him, and after a failed arson attempt, Daniel abandons him on a train. It's a particularly cruel scene, especially considering the era and lack of interconnectivity. HW's like 9 years old, and he's on his own. When it seems Daniel's moral compass has hit rock bottom, the void of family is seemingly filled by the arrival of his long-lost brother, Henry, whom Daniel grew up with. Henry showed up in the midst of Daniel's tumultuous period with HW, and his arrival fueled the two's separation. Because, like I said, HW has lost his value as a business asset, and Henry swoops in to take that place. Daniel and Henry rekindle their relationship, and he finds someone he can connect to during this particularly difficult period in his personal life and business endeavors. Daniel actually opens up to Henry, in what might be the most integral scene in revealing Daniel's character.
Are you envious? Do you get envious?
I don't think so, no.
I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed. I hate most people.
It's pretty dark and sad, but the fact that he's opening up to anybody at all illustrates just how much he values this reconciliation with Henry. However, what seemed to be the beginning of Daniel's path to some form of light ends up only cementing himself deeper in the depths of hell, as when the two are out swimming on the coast, Daniel recalls a childhood memory which they shared. It's left vague, but we can clearly see that this memory was cherished by Daniel, and a significant bonding moment between these two in their youth.
I say get liquored up and take him to the Peachtree Dams.
Yeah.
But Henry's unenthused, nothing response throws Daniel off. It gets his gears turning. We see him put together the pieces of Henry's story, and without dialogue, know Daniel has realized the unthinkable. This man is an imposter, after money. With this epiphany, any humanity left in Daniel is gone. Any empathy for his fellow man is gone. He has lost all faith in people entirely. He is now a complete and utter sociopath if he wasn't before. He snaps and kills this imposter, burying him in the woods. The next morning, he's woken up by a man, William Bandy. Some background: earlier in the film, when Daniel was first buying up plots of land surrounding Little Boston, he had one holdout, this being Bandy, whose land just so happens to be situated right where Daniel needs to build an oil pipeline to the coast, as he's already made a deal with Union Oil, but Bandy refuses to negotiate. Daniel desperately needs his land, but Bandy, finding Daniel at the scene of the crime, now has the knowledge of this murder which he can use as blackmail. Being a devout Christian, he orders Daniel to publicly atone for his sins and be baptized in the church in order for him to sell. So Daniel once again comes face to face with Eli Sunday. But this time, Eli holds all the power, and he relishes Daniel's comeuppance. By drawing out the whole ordeal, commanding Daniel to get on his knees, to yell out his sins, he further twists the knife in humiliating Daniel by smacking him around as Daniel did him. But in the end, Daniel perseveres. All he's endured is worth it. The moment after he's been baptized, he assures to himself, and then we get this great moment where he whispers something to Eli, but it's inaudible. We're left to imagine what he possibly could have said to him. Considering the stunt Eli just pulled and Daniel's earlier threat to Paul, it probably wasn't something nice. What we do know is Daniel gets his pipeline, cementing fortune and prosperity for the rest of his days. Eli leaves Little Boston on a mission trip across the West, and Daniel couldn't be happier. For now. The film jumps forward to 1927, where Daniel has secluded himself in a luxurious, albeit empty, estate. He's achieved everything he's ever wanted, yet he's become a bitter, alcoholic recluse. His life's work has been motivated by that insatiable drive to succeed, but once he actually is successful, his existence loses all its meaning. He doesn't know what to do with himself, and there's nothing to work for. No endgame. The now adult HW tells Daniel that he does care about him as a father, but he doesn't want to be partners anymore. Instead, he plans on starting his own oil business. This infuriates Daniel. Whether it be his ego or his loneliness, he lashes out at HW in a truly heartbreaking scene.
You're an orphan from a basket in the middle of the desert. And I took you for no other reason than I needed a sweet face to buy land. Did you get that? So now you know. Look at me!
One day, when Daniel's passed out on the floor of his personal bowling alley, a familiar face appears. Eli has arrived again after all these years, flaunting this new successful career he's found for himself. Eli witnesses the pathetic degenerate before him, satisfied that Daniel's ruthless actions and lack of faith led him to this. In his eyes, Daniel's got his comeuppance. But Eli isn't just here to patronize Daniel. He tells him that he's looking to buy land and start drilling as well, pitching that the two could make amends and become partners. Daniel mocks Eli, revealing that he owns that land and the oil beneath it. In fact, the oil has already been extracted. But he does still entertain the idea of a partnership under one condition. Eli must acknowledge that he is a false prophet, that God is a superstition. Now Eli comes off as desperate because he does end up saying it. But Daniel isn't satisfied. He makes Eli yell out the statements like one of his sermons, just like Eli had made Daniel shout out his sins. And Eli is totally dumbfounded by the revelation that this land is now worthless. And as he grows more desperate, it becomes clear that Eli isn't doing as well as he claimed to be, and he tearfully admits that he's a sinner. And Daniel loves it. He revels in Eli's ignorance, relishes Eli's suffering, reminding Eli of his twin brother's success since meeting Daniel at the start of the film.
It was Paul told me about you. He's the prophet. He's the smart one. I paid him $10,000 cash in hand. Like that. He has his own company now. A prosperous little business, 3 wells producing $5,000 a week. You're just the afterbirth. No. Slithered out on your mother's filth. No. They should have put you in a glass jar.
Daniel always wins. He humiliates and dominates Eli emotionally and physically, to the point of beating him to death with a bowling pin. And with that, the film comes to a close. So, what does it all mean? What was the point? The ending is fairly abrupt, and the film structure doesn't seem to signify what the story was building towards, at least not on a first watch. So let's take a step back here and really analyze the filmmaking craft and thematic elements that PTA employed here. PTA, while absolutely capable of pulpy and stylistic flourishes, generally directs his films with a more elusive and subdued approach. His historical dramas, like The Master or There Will Be Blood, are steeped in grounded realism and period accuracy, in this case rejecting the maximalist flair generally associated with the Western setting. There Will Be Blood is a character study and a psychological drama, more than it is a traditional Western or period piece. The film is a slow-burn series of conversations, with really only one major set piece, that being the oil derrick fire, which itself is a symbolic culmination of the film's 2 main motifs, fire and blood. Earlier, I referred to Daniel as capitalism personified, and what I mean by this is that the film uses its analyses of Daniel and his actions as a reflection of America's unbridled pure capitalism at the turn of the century, and the corruption of man brought by an era and system where selfishness, immorality, and exploitation prevail. Is Daniel's twisted moral compass a product of the era that shaped him, or is this the case of an innately corrupt soul brought into the world at precisely the perfect time to flourish? I believe it's a mix of both. Recall the film's introduction, our brief glimpse of Daniel when he had nothing to show for himself but that insatiable work ethic. The lifestyle of a nomadic prospector is a rough, arduous, and primal one, like a prehistoric hunter-gatherer. Daniel builds an almost animalistic animosity for his competition, like a wolf defending its territory. Like, look at this fucking guy. His body language, that canthal tilt, those cheekbones. I feel like I'm staring at a wolf in human form. He's fucking terrifying. There is no way Daniel Day-Lewis isn't just a guy from the 19th century. Who looks like this? So many amazing faces in this film. I mentioned this with Casey Affleck as Robert Ford earlier, but certain people just have those faces, perfectly capturing that sense of earnest, somber fatigue you get from portraits of the time. H.W.'s actor especially. This kid looks like he stepped out of a daguerreotype photograph. And There Will Be Blood is a visual marvel, earning director of photography and longtime PTA collaborator Robert Elswit an Oscar. Elswit takes an elegant and unobtrusive approach to crafting the image, from the broad and elegant Steadicam shots to the still portraits of intimate expression. The film evokes a certain old Hollywood classicism and refinement. Paired with Jack Fisk's phenomenal production design and Johnny Greenwood's riveting musical score, There Will Be Blood feels momentous, a timeless expression of pure, unbridled artistry at the largest scale and at the highest level. This is one of the all-time greats. No Country for Old Men is a modern classic. Of the 3 films I'm covering, this one has undoubtedly left the greatest cultural impact. A financial and critical success, the Coen brothers' screen adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's 2005 novel swept the Academy Awards, taking home Best Picture, Director, Supporting Actor, and Adapted Screenplay. Set in West Texas, 1980, the film follows a blue-collar Vietnam vet, Llewellyn Moss, who discovers the aftermath of a cartel shootout in the desert, and a satchel containing $2 million in drug money. Looking for the money, however, is a psychotic and methodical mercenary, Anton Chigurh, slaughtering anyone in his path. With Moss on the run and Chigurh hot on his trail, it's up to local sheriff, Ed Tom Bell, to catch up with Moss and put a stop to Chigurh's bloodshed. But this new age of senseless violence and ruthless criminality might be too much for the aging Sheriff Bell to handle, in this world far too cruel and unforgiving for Moss to escape the clutches of fate. In this story, the heroes don't beat the villains, and our protagonist doesn't ride off into the sunset. No Country for Old Men is an exploration of man's fragile mortality and moral ambivalence, and it's fucking awesome. Unlike the previous two films, No Country for Old Men doesn't cover a large amount of time. The film's narrative instead takes place over maybe 1 or 2 weeks. This presents a far more straightforward and streamlined sequence of events. The Coen brothers are masters of their craft, and No Country for Old Men perfectly exemplifies the core fundamentals of quality storytelling. The film doesn't underestimate the audience. It trusts our ability to put 2 and 2 together when we're presented with information, as opposed to over-explaining characters' intentions and underlying emotions. It's a masterclass in subtlety, in showing opposed to telling. Even the film's opening narration follows the rule of show don't tell. You might think, that makes literally no sense at all. And maybe you're right, but let me explain what I mean. Instead of some omniscient narrator introducing us to the setting and conflict, we're presented this intimate opening monologue by Sheriff Bell, as he recounts his time as a lawman and his relationship with his late father who also served as sheriff. He reflects on the lawmen of the past and how they would have responded to the far darker criminal element of today, confronting his own fear of inadequacy in the face of these changing times. This monologue tells us absolutely nothing about the plot itself, but shows us everything the film will be about. No Country for Old Men is about as meta as a neo-Western can get. Its themes explicitly represent the romanticized collective memory of the Old West, the good old days of black and white law and order, of common decency and an honor among thieves. Sheriff Bell fulfills the archetype of the honorable, white-hatted sheriff, quite literally, and Anton Chigurh is the man in black, an unsympathetic and irredeemable evil. However, the film deconstructs these archetypes, revealing the underlying moral complexity of these characters. I find those who come away from No Country for Old Men describing Chigurh as this dispassionate and unbiased manifestation of chaos to have completely missed the point of the film, and I hate how that's become the main interpretation you see everyone talk about. Y'all are giving this dude way too much fucking credit. Anton Chigurh is full of shit. His actions aren't justified no matter what he says. Look at his signature, the coin toss. Flipping a coin is the universal symbol of random chance. So Chigurh, whose entire philosophy is built on this code of objective fairness, flips a coin to determine whether or not he will kill who sits before him. On top of this, he orders the person to call it themselves, so it's their action that determines whether they live or die, deflecting responsibility from Chigurh as he dispassionately carries out fate's hand. I don't think you need me to explain why this is a load of bullshit. Chigurh would like you to believe that if you end up coming face to face with this coin toss, that it's only fair, that your actions have somehow led you to this point, and that fate is actually the one serving your final judgment as opposed to Chigurh himself.
You go to hell.
All right. Let me ask you something. If the rule you followed brought you to this, of what use was the rule?
However, we're shown that Chigurh does have petty biases and his own subjective worldview which influence his actions. This is displayed in the film's most iconic moment, the gas station scene, where an innocent shopkeeper attempts to make friendly small talk at the counter, which clearly bothers this antisocial psychopath. Aggravated, Chigurh mocks and scares the living shit out of the poor guy, and scoffs once he's learned that the shopkeeper inherited the store through marriage.
You married into it.
With this, Chigurh reveals his coin and demands the shopkeeper call it. Keep in mind, this man has done nothing wrong. He makes a legal, honest living, he isn't standing in the way of Chigurh's goal, he hasn't witnessed him commit any crime, Chigurh could easily let him be. But instead, he's so personally irritated by that fact that he is willing to murder him, because at the end of the day, Chigurh enjoys killing people, and will find any trivial reason to do so. But that doesn't align with his code, so he deflects any accountability from him onto the coin, and to chance. But this isn't chance, it's a choice. He chooses to put people in a situation where the coin decides their fate. It's a sick game he plays with his victims, because he's a psychopath who gets off on monologuing about his moral superiority and enlightenment before ending somebody's life.
Call it.
The coin don't have no say. It's just you.
But with all this being said, Anton Chigurh is still terrifying. Honestly, he's more than terrifying. This is one of the scariest characters in all of fiction. Cormac McCarthy's writing is masterfully conveyed through Javier Bardem's bone-chilling performance, which, like Daniel Day-Lewis's Daniel Plainview, has cemented itself in film history as one of the all-time greats. Now, I'd like to focus more on the idea of choice versus chance, because it's the very concept this narrative is built around. Characters are thrust into circumstances by chance, but it's the choices they make in response which illustrate their true nature. Llewellyn Moss discovered the scene of the shootout by chance, but he made the choice to leave with the satchel of money. You can't really blame the guy, that's some life-changing dough, but it's a decision that reveals Moss as a morally gray opportunist. However, later that night, Moss returns to the scene with a jug of water for a survivor he discovered earlier. This choice reveals Moss as compassionate. Yeah, he's greedy with the money, but he's not completely selfish, as he's decided to put himself back into harm's way to help a dying man. Relative to the two thematic extremes fulfilled by Sheriff Ed Tom Bell and Anton Chigurh, Llewellyn Moss is a middle ground. If Bell is our narrative white hat and Chigurh our narrative black hat, Moss is a contemporary spaghetti western gunslinger. His attitude honestly reminds me a lot of Arthur Morgan. The film goes out of its way to hype up Llewellyn Moss as our leading man and the hero of the story. He's shown to be competent, compassionate, reasonable, and for all his flaws, well-intentioned. Moss is a guy you'd want to grab a beer with. He's served 2 tours in Nam, he's a skilled marksman and tracker, a quick thinker and problem solver, and always caring and loyal to his wife, Carla Jean. We have every reason to believe he'll make it out of this situation. He already anticipates and outthinks Chigurh at every turn, he bests him in a gunfight, and when first communicating with Chigurh on the phone, he threatens him like a total badass main character would.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring you something, all right? Decided to make you a special project of mine. You ain't gonna have to come look for me at all.
It really does seem like the stage is being set for a final showdown between the two. And with Sheriff Bell hot on Moss's trail, narratively you'd think, okay, Moss and Chigurh will have their showdown. Maybe Moss is nearly killed, so Bell swoops in to save the day by taking out Chigurh, confronting his fear of today's violent criminality once and for all so that Moss and Carla Jean can make it out the country with the cash and retire. This way, all character arcs are fulfilled, our villain gets his comeuppance, and our hero rides off into the sunset. The Coens and McCarthy knew this is the traditional Western ending we'd be expecting, so of course, they subverted it. Moss dies off screen, not even killed by Chigurh, but shot up by the cartel. Sheriff Bell just misses it, arriving as the cartel guys flee the scene. I know this part is where the film lost a lot of people, as many were frustrated to see our lead offed so unceremoniously by nameless, faceless gangsters, but that's precisely the point the film wants to drive home. Moss cemented his fate the moment he took the satchel. The world is chaotic and unforgiving, and random chance will thrust you into circumstances you were never cut out for. The idea of being cut out for something, of competency, of being the right man for the job, is another theme No Country for Old Men explores, especially as it relates to chance. You can be as proficient and skilled as the notorious Anton Chigurh, master assassin and unyielding force of nature, but still get T-boned in an intersection when you had the green light, because at the end of the day, our existence is chaos, and what happens to us is out of our hands. You can think you're in control, that you know what you're doing, but the world will always be there to remind you that you have no power at all. Carson Wells, a fellow hitman, tells Moss,
"Yeah, you're not cut out for this."
But clearly, neither is Wells, as he's effortlessly killed in the very next scene by Chigurh icing out the competition. Moss believes himself capable, and he is shown to be intelligent and practical, taking every necessary precaution to stay 2 steps ahead of Chigurh and the cartel, only for a dumbass mother-in-law to mindlessly yap away his location to cartel guys at the airport, getting caught and killed over something completely out of his control. Sheriff Bell is the only character in the story who's actually able to acknowledge that he isn't cut out for this. As an aging sheriff in a changing landscape of crime, but also as a man with any semblance of control in his chaotic and random existence. Sheriff Bell spends this entire film, this entire case, having an existential crisis of sorts. As he established in the opening monologue, he doesn't understand today's rampant and senseless violence, and can't help but wonder what the old-time sheriffs would have made of it, how good they had it. He feels better adjusted to the past and overmatched by the present. At the end of the day, he's scared. There's already an existential terror of reaching the twilight of your life and realizing that time has passed you. Now apply that to a perilous career that puts you in situations with men like Anton Chigurh. I'd start questioning if I'm cut out for this too. Like Moss before him, Bell makes a fateful decision to return to the scene of a crime. After Llewellyn's death in El Paso, Bell has dinner with the sheriff who's one of his old geezer pals. The sheriff mentions how baller as fuck it was for Chigurh to stroll right back into that initial crime scene, and Bell realizes that Chigurh will likely also return to this one, looking for the money. With this epiphany, Bell decides to return to Llewellyn's murder scene and face this madman once and for all. It's this very sequence that I believe to be the narrative's climax. In confronting Chigurh, Sheriff Bell is confronting his fears and truly testing himself. Throughout the film, Bell's avoided tough situations, masking his fear with dry wit and humor in his excuses. Reluctant to use a gun, he always sends in his deputy before him. So when he arrives at this motel all alone and actually draws his gun, we know shit's about to go down. The lock on the door has been shot through by the bolt gun, confirming Chigurh's presence at the scene. We cut to a haunting shot of Chigurh waiting in the darkness, showing us death is lurking just on the other side of the door. Sheriff Bell takes one last deep breath and opens it, entering the room. But Chigurh is nowhere to be seen. Scoping out the area, Bell finds the air vent has been unscrewed, indicating that Chigurh already found the money and fled. So though Bell made the choice to return and face Chigurh, by chance he just missed him, and the coin in there is to remind us of that. So what's up with the shot of Chigurh at the door? There are a few ways to interpret this scene. 1. Chigurh was there, waiting behind the door before an opportunity to silently slip out presented itself. Or 2. Chigurh was never there. Well, he was, but that shot of Chigurh in the darkness was actually a glimpse into Bell's mind. I like this interpretation as the eerie, stylized contrast of the shot portrays the fear he's feeling in the moment. The moment Bell saw the broken lock, he fully believed he was about to die. After this whole ordeal, Bell retires from the department and pays a visit to his cousin Ellis.
Loretta tells me you're quitting. How come you're doing that?
I don't know. I feel overmatched.
Ellis recounts a story of their Uncle Mac, a Texas Ranger gunned down on his own front porch by bandits back in 1909. He refutes Bell's romantic view of the past, letting him know that man's capability for cruel, senseless violence has always been a thing.
What you got ain't nothing new. This country's hard on people. You can't stop what's coming. It ain't all waiting on you. That's vanity.
The film then jumps to Carla Jean returning home from Moss's funeral, and Anton Chigurh is there waiting for her. Chigurh's mission is over. He's got the money. Carla Jean means nothing to him, and she wasn't involved in this situation at all. But Chigurh reveals he's there because of a quote-unquote promise he made to her husband, referring to threatening to kill Carla Jean when on the phone with Llewellyn earlier. It's a matter of principle to him, keeping his word. What a load of bullshit. There's no honor in this, no righteous code, no hand of fate. Chigurh is just a petty psychopath once again finding any excuse to murder somebody. Sweet Carla Jean, of all people, is the one person in the film who actually calls him out on this. She's low-key the realest motherfucker in this movie. Before we can see what happens next, it cuts to outside the house as Chigurh steps out the front door. Did he kill Carla Jean? I believe absolutely yes, as the film leaves a very clear escalation of clues that pay off in the body language of this moment. In the earlier motel shootout sequence, Chigurh removed his boots before approaching the room. What we as an audience first interpret as a means of silencing his footsteps gains a new meaning later after he kills Carson Wells and lifts his boots onto the table to keep blood off them. So now in this scene, Chigurh inspecting his boots for blood shows that he did indeed kill her. With this, he gets off with the money scot-free. Okay, the universe had to throw that at Chigurh to remind him he's a total dick, but he still gets away in the end. The final scene in No Country for Old Men sees Bell in his kitchen, staring out a window, reflecting on his newfound retirement. Bell has no context on what he should do with his life now, as even his own father never made it this far.
I'm older now than he ever was by 20 years, so in a sense, he's the younger man.
He tells his wife about 2 dreams he had that night, both about his father.
It was about meeting him in town somewhere and he'd give me some money. I think I lost it.
Like so much in this film, you can interpret these in a few ways. This could represent the idea of money literally, like the satchel of money every major character was after, every character except for Bell, or by losing the money he could be referring to losing understanding of the world. You could also look at the money his father gives him as representing the life advice, faith, and experience the father passes down to his son, faith and understanding Bell feels he's lost.
The second one, it was like we was both back in the older times, and I was a horseback going through the mountains of a night. It was cold, and there was snow on the ground. He rode past me and kept on going, never said nothing going by, just rode on past. When he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire in a horn, the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon. He's fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold. And I knew that whenever I got there, he'd be there. And then I woke up.
I think what Bell's subconscious expressed here was the idea of finding light in a dark world and following that light, following in his father's footsteps, continuing his legacy like one of the sheriffs of old, reaffirming a world where good triumphs over evil. By following the light of his father, he could return to that world. But then he woke up. It's nothing but a dream. That world never existed, and Bell never understood this one. As he'd just been reminded in the previous scene, the world has always been chaotic and cruel and there's nothing he could do about it. Honestly, I could apply the same logic to film historians regarding how they categorize neo or revisionist westerns, dumbing down westerns of the past. It's easy to fall into the trap of simplifying Western film history into binary eras, the idea of classic westerns of old versus contemporary neo-westerns. Hell, I'm guilty of this. In reality, there have always been westerns making social commentary, westerns that explore history and morality with nuance. The Wild Bunch is a revisionist western. Red River's a revisionist western, same with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or the Dollars Trilogy. But most people would think of these as the classic that revisionist westerns build off of. Now, that doesn't mean the praise contemporary neo-westerns receive isn't warranted. No Country for Old Men is still an incredible feat of filmmaking. The Coen brothers' direction elevate McCarthy's masterpiece into an audio-visual marvel, serving as one of, if not the greatest text-to-screen adaptation ever made. This is a damn near perfect movie. There's just so much to gush about. The Coen brothers are such precise filmmakers, crafting stories that unfold through every and in the dialogue, through every nod and glare. They seem tailor-made to adapt the raw, naturalistic, yet articulate wordage of a McCarthy novel. This is the Coens at their most subtle, yet at the same time flexing their hardest. Roger Deakins is back at DP, getting his Western fix in 2007, shooting this alongside the assassination of Jesse James. Both films capture their own unique perspective of the West. Jesse James feels far more grand and theatrical, whereas No Country for Old Men captures a gritty, matter-of-fact beauty. But the frame is always rich in texture and atmosphere. Atmosphere is something No Country for Old Men does best. The film has no original score, at all. It's a sonic experience like no other. You're entranced by the wind in the trees, the boots in dirt, or the boots on hardwood, every creak, every breath. There are so many parts in this film that'll have your butthole clenched so tight that by the time the scene ends, you've got hemorrhoids. Like the coin toss, or Belle going back to the motel, and especially the shootout halfway through the film. Moss and Chigurh don't share the screen together once during the whole scene. In fact, none of our three leads are on screen with each other the entire film. How nuts is that? Josh Brolin is fantastic, Kelly MacDonald is fantastic, Javier Bardem gets all the attention, but I think Tommy Lee Jones is the best performance. In fact, I think this might be my favorite performance in a movie ever. Definitely top 3. His Texas drawl, his physicality and body language, it's incredible. Look at how he reads the paper. Look at how he looks at you when he's got his reading glasses on. Tommy Lee Jones has that geezer glare down to a science. Some incredible character actors here too. Garrett Dillahunt is back and always delivers in any Western bit part he's given. Barry Corbin is so damn memorable as Cousin Ellis. Same with other characters who only show up once, like Roger Boyce as the El Paso sheriff or Gene Jones as the gas station clerk. It was great seeing him in Killers of the Flower Moon last year. And I think that about wraps up what I have to say about No Country for Old Men, so I guess that means we're coming to a close on the video. I hope you enjoyed revisiting these 3 modern classics of the 21st century and gained some newfound appreciation for them. I know I did. You'd think spending so much time with these the past few months would make me grow sick of them, but it's only deepened my love for these movies. I'd like to take the time to formally apologize to James Mangold and everyone else involved in 3:10 to Yuma, as I simply did not have the time to discuss it, but regardless of that, it doesn't maintain the sort of similar spiritual trilogy these 3 films I covered did, if that makes sense. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you comment down below if you have any other ideas for video topics, and don't forget to join the Discord to stay up to date on my channel. The link will be in the description below. I'll see y'all over yonder, cowpokes. Godspeed.